Hello there. Today we will discuss how Ferrari improved its race pace by increasing the ride height slightly. So something that is quite noticeable is that over the course of this Formula One season, Ferrari has significantly improved its race pace relative to Mercedes. Um, from the beginning of the season towards the later part of the season. So Ferrari was always very good in terms of qualifying, but at the start of the season, Ferrari was pretty bad in the races in terms of tire wear and race pace in general. So the interesting theory is that at, after the Spanish Grand Prix, there was a Pirelli tire test where Sainz pushed Ferrari to test their car at a slightly higher ride height. And so in an article, it said, while the aero platform and simulation data pointed to the Ferrari delivering the best lap times when it ran low and stiff, Sainz had been urging it to shift stance. He felt that despite what the data was saying, the low stiff approach was not actually the best way forward. Now, the interesting thing is, I think the data is not wrong, because at a lower ride height, you would have a stronger ground effect from both the floor and front wing. So this is obviously good for lap time, but it would require very stiff suspension to limit travel in jounce. Let me just go to what I mean. So this is from the Vico Dynamics course on my website, slides that I created for those. So if you imagine, this is the suspension rate curve that you would typically have, although for a racing car would the units, so it would be a lot stiffer than for road car, but the principle still holds. So here you have the bump stop or jounce bumper to help limit the amount of travel in bump, so that you don't bottom out the car, and also so that you bottom out the car more more progressively, not just a sudden metal stop. So if you imagine running the car very low, you would be into the jounce bumpers very often, rather than in the softer part of the curve, on top of having to run the stiffer springs. And the consequence of that is that the gray bars are stiffer springs, the blue bars are the softer springs. So with the stiffer springs, you use less suspension travel as expected, but the tire load variation goes up quite a bit, and comfort also gets significantly worse. Now that is bad, because if we go back to the tire curves, so if you imagine if you were trying to generate say 3,000 and a bit newtons lateral or longitudinal tire force, so you can see here, if the tire load was above, say, 2,000, it would still be possible, but once you get below 2,000, it very much becomes impossible. So having the large tire load oscillations, you would end up with very vastly changing tire slip angles and slip ratios to generate the same force, which which is just bad for tire wear. So going back to the Ferrari race pace, so the stiff suspension requires the very low ride height at the beginning of the season requires very stiff suspension to limit travel in jounce. So over bumps, you have the larger downforce variation, because when you're already running very low, any change in the height is proportionally speaking pretty behind. Oh, hi, hello, kitty. So besides the larger downforce variation, there's larger tire load variation when there are bumps, because when there's a bump, the suspension is in warp. Imagine a bump like trying to lift the vehicle from one single tire. If you have basically no suspension, then any small bump will just load that single diagonal, and the other diagonal doesn't get loaded. So yeah, very stiff suspension over bumpy surface means wildly, very quickly changing tire loads. This means quickly shifting balance from the combination of the shifting downforce, front and rear, and the tire loads. So this makes the car hard to drive, which means kind of snappy for the drivers. And the larger tire load variations. So as mentioned, during braking and cornering, you have higher tire load variation from the wheel oscillations, which is bad for tire life. So this is not a problem for qualifying, because the stronger ground effect kind of is making up for quite a bit, and the tire life, well, you don't really care over one lap, and the drivers are super concentrated over that one lap and can deal with the harder to drive car. But once you come to the race, then the tires wear out pretty quickly, which is bad for your race pace, and it's also tiring for the drivers, and that's also not good for the race pace. So by increasing the ride height slightly, Ferrari is able to run slightly softer suspension, which although might be slightly worse for the ground effect, the changes in the vehicle balance are likely to be much less. So the car becomes more predictable for both the tire aero and tire loads. This makes the car easier to drive for the drivers. The tire load variation from the vertical wheel oscillations will also be a lot better while cornering and braking. This is better for tire life. It does have the effect of reducing the effectiveness of the front wing, which leads to more understeer that Leclerc doesn't like. So you will see evidence of all of this in the latest headlines, where Mercedes is worried that it's lost the race day F1 tire edge over Ferrari, and Leclerc has been kind of complaining that the vehicle balance is kind of less to his liking. So he's saying, I'm not completely comfortable with the car at the moment, a bit too much understeer, which is, all kind of expected from this slightly increased ride height. So hope it was an interesting analysis. Let me know what you think, and till next time.